Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Zettabytes Today Lunch and Learn series. Today we're featuring Connie Matthews and a talk about AI and cybersecurity. We'd love to thank our sponsors at Revel IT for the Lunch and Learn today. For those of you who have never been here with Zettabytes before, we're in LGBTQ and data and design here in Columbus, Ohio, focused on connecting folks to different resources and making sure we all know who each other are. If you're interested, please visit Zettabytes.Today. For now, I'd love to turn it over to Connie Matthews, who is going to talk to us about cybersecurity and AI. Connie, take the floor. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Vinny, and thanks for having me. So I would love this to be interactive, so feel free to ask any questions, interrupt if there's something you want me to dive deeper into. But everyone probably realizes that AI, specifically generative AI, has taken the world by storm. The history of AI has been around for a very long time, but what has really moved the needle with AI is the whole generative AI. And there's so many different platforms out there. And I'll talk a little bit today about some tips and tricks when considering and using AI, and talk a little bit why it's very important in these discussions to discuss cybersecurity and the guardrails that we want to put in place to make sure that AI is as safe as we possibly can make it. So some of the things that I have found really interested is in AI, we talk about garbage in and garbage out. And one of the things that I will recommend everyone doing is that most of you are probably familiar with Wikipedia. AI is kind of the same way. It just allows a bunch of people and bots and other organizations to put a lot of data into these engines. And so what sometimes it can be accurate and sometimes it may not be accurate. So I'll give a quick example of why it's learning all the time, but it's not always up to date on the newest and greatest things. So last year, the SEC actually put out some rulings around breaches and how publicly traded companies would have to report. And so I was actually doing a presentation around that. And I use ChatGPT a lot of times to do like outlines for my talks and to do a variety of those things. And I put that in, and it came back that there was not any really new info. They didn't have any information on it. And they also said, go back to back to the internet and do some searches there. So that's a perfect example of how it's not always 100% accurate and 100% up to date. What I have found really interesting is I'm pretty sure everyone's heard of deep fake. And so a lot of the deep fake stuff is being emulated by AI on the back end. And we probably have seen a lot of, like, especially in the current election cycle right now, you constantly see images where Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are put in locations that they may have been at that location, but then it's almost like it's not Photoshop, but think about like photoshopping images and putting it in there. And so it shows that these folks are different places and they're not really there. We're also seeing a huge uptick in like famous movie stars where they're taking their heads and creating like inappropriate like nude photos and pushing them all over the internet. And so sometimes it's very, very difficult to tell what's real and what's not real. And so one of the things that I think about, I actually just did a talk for senior citizens, and we talked a lot about AI and deepfake and how to protect ourselves. And so I think a couple things, about 19 out of the 50 states that are 52 states that we have now have some privacy rules. And so there's a thing called GDPR, which is about privacy in Europe. And we're starting to see more and more of that privacy here in the United States. California was the first one. And it's kind of all over the place. There's some on the West Coast, East Coast, then like in Texas, and I think Florida also has it. And so with all of that, part of this, I think, movement to move a lot of these things does come in with AI and deepfake, because as we all know that there's so much information out there already about us. Like there was just recently a Social Security data breach where it pretty much lost all US citizens' Social Security card. And so we're always trying to figure out how do we protect ourselves and the data that's around us. And so one of the things that I think is really, really important with AI. If you're using a chat GPT or Copilot, I mean, there's a gazillion of them. You need to be really, really careful what you put in those chat applications, because everything you put in there is part of the all of the gathering of data that other people can see. So I actually worked with a client where their HR person actually uploaded all of their employee data. And they were just trying to do research, and the person didn't have any idea that everyone could see that. And so we're starting to see a lot of that where people are putting a bunch of personal information or corporate information. So you have to be really, really careful, because remember, like Wikipedia, everything that's put into these engines, it's just constant. It's like a constantly taking in information. Some of the reputable ones are trying to do some validation, but as you can all imagine, technology is always way ahead of like security and privacy and those types of things. So those are some of the things that I would definitely caution by, don't put social security numbers in, don't put addresses in, don't put, credit card information, anything that you don't, I think about, don't put anything in there you wouldn't want others to know. Now, what I try to do, and I think when you use AI, the more specific you can be when you ask it a question, the better results that you will get. So, again, like I mentioned, I use it a lot for my training decks. I use it a lot for speaking. And it's made me so much more productive. So, something might have taken me a couple hours sometimes takes me 20 to 30 minutes, because it helps organize my thoughts very, very quickly. And I'm able to build out decks extremely fast from that. But if I am like researching a topic that I don't know a lot about, I may use ChatGPT as my first, but then I'll go to the internet and go to trusted sources that to validate what that output is from, ChatGPT or whatever engine you're using, just to make sure that it is actually accurate. So again, be really careful that it's not everything that you get back from those search results does not necessarily mean it's true or accurate. And I think I just saw, so I have a
Yeah,
question. When you say
I can
everyone
read the
can see
question
it,
for you if that's helpful.
okay. Um,
When you say
so
everyone can see it, is it the people working on training those models or anyone on the internet?
So the models, if they're done right, it is limited to some validation, kind of like when you write an application, who has access to it is not everyone. But just like Wikipedia, when I say everyone, so anything like you could go in and put some information in there and it will upload it into the engines. Some of the more reputable companies will try to validate things if something doesn't seem right. And Wikipedia has done like that's an example. They've done a pretty good job that they do go through and sanitize and try to see things that may be incorrect, but there's so much data, it's really, really tough. And we'll talk a little bit too, like around AI, having guardrails around cybersecurity is really, really important. And what I mean by that is that some organizations have private generative AI where that may stay within your four walls. But I will say I've had a lot of conversations with my clients about, should you allow people to use AI? Should you not? I think it's really going to be challenging for a company to say we're not going to use it, because most everyone has BYOD, bring your own device. And most people have Chat GPT on their phones or Copilot or one of the other ones. So they're still using it, especially if it's not a company's device. So my big thing is let's make people aware. Let's put guardrails in place of what use cases should you use it for, what use cases should you not use for. So it's really about validation as much as possible. But again, there's so much data that's why we always say garbage in, garbage out, to make sure that the information you're using is actually legitimate. The other problem that you can face, and I know I've talked to a couple colleges around this, so the students are using ChatGPT to write papers, and they're trying to figure out how to manage that. Some colleges are embracing it, but you have to be careful, because if you notice when you use these generative AI, they don't resource where or source where the information's coming from. So there could be a potential where someone has put something, somehow something got in there that's protected. So you want to be really careful if you're copying word for something, because it could be protected. There are some laws that they're talking about. Anything that's put into ChatGPT is kind of open source and people have access. So a lot of people that are writing books right now are using it. And so I've heard some talks around, you need to be careful. Like if you're putting your whole entire book into ChatGPT, don't be surprised if someone steals all that data. So it's, again, it's just really protecting. I really think it should be good for high level thoughts, and then you fill in your thoughts based on what comes back. Does that make sense? Okay. Um, so I've talked a little bit about this, but we need to be really, really cautious with any generative AI. That a lot of people have talked about AI is going to take everybody's jobs. I do not personally think that's the case. I'm 55, so I started in IT back at Windows NT4 into Windows 2000. And at that time, very few companies and people had home, like not many people had home computers. And in corporations, normally the executive team and certain people had laptops. And if for people that are old enough, we talked about computers were going to take everybody's jobs. They're going to take away jobs. AI is the same way. It's going to take away things that are very repetitive, but we it'll create new jobs because someone still has to. There's always that personable interaction, people interaction that makes sense. So, for example, in cybersecurity, when you look at a security operations center, think of it the same as a network operations center, help desk kind of thing like that. When we look at all of the data that's coming in at a security operations center, no one can get through all of their logs. It's almost like finding a needle in a haystack many times. And so for insecurity, we're excited that AI may be able to allow our teams to focus on more of the things that are important to an organization to protect them. Because when you think about cybersecurity, it's organized crime at its best. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry on both the good and bad side of things. And so we're excited to see, like, how can this help our teams get through more logs to be more specific and really going after the things that could be problematic for organizations. So just like back in the, in the early 2000s, late 90s, as you think about, for us that are older, I mean, look how jobs have evolved and how they've changed. And so I always talk about with security, it's a journey, not a destination. I also think our careers are very much that way too, because I think we can all, if we step back, if we're stagnant and we're not open to learn and change, we're not as relevant anymore. And you even think about, I'm not sure if any of you guys heard about the CrowdStrike incident, which it was not a cybersecurity incident, but it was a rollout and it shut everything down. And I actually have some friends that work in a hospital, and none of the new nurses know how to chart the old way. They were taught to do it all electronic. And so one of the things that exercise really started to create is, what are resiliency plans that, how do you go back to piece of paper and pen? Some things you can do that, some things you can't. And so we're always learning as things evolve and change, of like, sometimes going back to the old way is not always the worst case scenario. In this example, when you look at Southwest, they were on very old technology. They're the only airline that didn't really have any incidents or outages when the CrowdStrike thing hit. And so I know that's not specific to AI, but it's just kind of talking about why it's always important to evolve and change as we go through things. We're all probably familiar with this too. So there is a lot of bias that can be put into AI. So I'll give you an example. When you look at self-driving cars, you have to kind of look at what are the guardrails you have on the back end to protect. So let's just say a let's say a person like or a young person that doesn't like old people, and they created a point system, like, on automated cars, self-driving cars. They have, if there is an accident, they have to make split second decisions on what they're going to do. And I think we've all been involved in or seen car accidents where there may be multiple people. What if it's hitting a mom and her daughter or a baby? Or what if it's hitting an elderly person? Or what if it's hitting a man or a woman? And those decisions on the back end, the way that's developed and programmed, it could create a bias to a certain type of group of people. And AI is kind of the same way, in the sense that depending on who's working on the engines and how they develop them, there could be very potential some bias in that. And I think it was Google, like when kind of generative AI, I don't know if you guys saw this, but they did some stuff on the website, and what it created was like people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. The AI engines actually created all of them to be African American. And so that's kind of some of the interesting things that can happen depending on how you have those checks in there and how you decide how you're making decisions and how do you move forward. Does that make sense? So it's interesting. And the other thing that's really interesting that I've seen a lot is in jobs. So many times, for example, minorities and women generally will not apply for a job unless they have 80% of the qualifications, where men will apply many times with 25 to 30%. So sometimes job descriptions, the way they're written, it eliminates a lot of the diversity hire, because they won't even apply for those jobs. And so one of the things in our industry we're really looking at is, let's be a little more specific on what we really need versus what we really like. Because, for example, you may have all these qualifications. And so when you have all that and you have especially entry level jobs, you're eliminating a huge part of the workforce by doing that. And so that is something that I think organizations are trying to be better. We still have work to do, but I really do think that that's going to change over time. The other big thing is, just like in your personal and professional devices, Microsoft has Patch Tuesday, but there's other patches that are out there. So just like every application we have, whether it's, whether it's ChatGPT or any of the other ones, make sure that in your settings that you have those updates on and you update things. Because I remember when I first started, like anybody that had an Apple device, you didn't have to patch. But then when the iPad and the iPhone came out, the market really changed and shifted. So hackers focus so much on Microsoft because they're probably in 98% of all corporate environments. And as we saw that change, now I feel like, I don't know about you, I have an iPhone. I feel like I'm doing updates constantly now. And if you look at all the updates, a lot of them are security features, and some of those may be AI tools. So making sure you patch and keep everything up to date is really important too. I'll pause for a second. Does anybody have any
Yeah,
questions?
I do.
Yeah.
A couple of them. So I apologize again for everybody here. I had laryngitis. I'm still recovering from it, so I lost my voice. To me, cybersecurity is like involves two things. One is prevention, and one is what do you do when a breach happens, and mitigation, right? And so one was on the prevention side. There are a lot of AI apps that we are finding, and a lot of people are using it, is, taking meeting notes, for example. And for example, here at Zettabytes, this is a safe environment because it is for LGBTQ professionals primarily. And so when people, even the professionals themselves, log in or put it on their calendar, like, some AI tool, we are actually actively like stopping them from getting in, because what we have noticed is that it reports everything and it's going into another different database where it is staying there. So a lot of companies, they have vendors and all kinds of people who are using this, because I'm probably the oldest in this room, but I'm used to writing notes.
Yeah.
Taking notes. And so, we have gone, that to me, a step too far, where we are recording this without seeking permission, of the company or of the environment. And so I think there needs to be some prevention and tools given to people, like we will be barred from doing that. I mean, it to me, the entire, how would I put it? I mean, your entire IP or conversations and everything is getting recorded on another environment.
Yeah.
So I had a question: if you see, companies taking steps about these types of, scheduling AIs, bots, and note-taking AI bots, sort of work enhancement tools that is going to some other, database.
Yeah, so it's interesting. And I think when I mentioned about privacy rules, especially in the United States, when you think about privacy in Europe, it's very defined and there's
Right.
a lot of things you can't do. And then the United States, we don't have that as much, though that's starting to change. And I would really like to see something that balances the extreme like controls versus no controls, because sometimes it's not logical. And so, for example, when all this happened, I don't know if you guys remember, but Zoom actually um, forced where every one of your meetings they were listening kind of like for an intensive purposes for ease of explanation, they were basically capturing all of everybody, all their clients meetings. They were saying they were pulling out confidential things, and what happened was when companies found out, they went after, I mean, they were all like, we're canceling Zoom. So Zoom put more controls in place. I think because generative AI has hit us so fast, the attackers are already figuring out ways to get around it. Like, for example, I do a lot of public speaking, so they need someone's voice for like 5 seconds to emulate it, but less than 2 minutes to make it perfect. And so I think we'll start to see more responsible AI. There's some legislative stuff that they're already working on. I think there may be some that has passed. So we're going to start to see, I think, some more controls. But I will say in security, I've been doing this for 18 years. We have to get away from being reactive to proactive. And so that's where I think that AI can be used. If like we can narrow down the problems quicker and faster, that helps us to be more proactive. But as a security professional, you have to be always ready for reactive and proactive, and it never stops because things change constantly. So I think that right now we have to kind of take control of our own safety. I think me and my team, we've been doing security awareness talks for companies and building out content for companies around what is being responsible with AI. Because I think when you look at technology is always moves very, very quickly. And I remember when I first got in security, we used to talk about management by Sky Mall. I don't know if you guys remember the magazines that used to be by
Mm-hmm.
Sky Mall and the airplanes. Well, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the security and IT vendors would put ads. And so when CEOs and the C suite were traveling, they would look at that, come back to their teams and like, hey, I saw this ad that says this will take care of all of our problems. Well, there isn't a silver bullet for cybersecurity. And so many times we're educating the leadership because they want to be helpful. They want to do the right things, but it's not that easy. It's a little more complicated than that. So that's where it's like this awareness and having open dialogue and conversations really does come into play. And then, again, understanding your limitations of how you're using generative AI. I think what we're seeing is big companies are writing their own models, like the Nationwides, the Cardinals, Victoria's Secret. I'm not saying they all do them, but they have the money to do that. But as small and mid-sized companies, they don't have the funds to do it because it can be really, really expensive. So I think it's just something that will continue to evolve. But again, it hit us so quickly that we're still trying to evolve. So another example, kind of with deepfake and AI, one of the things banks used to do when you wanted to move a large amount of money, they did a phone call activation, that type of thing. So they're scrambling, like coming up with different ways. I know with like my family, we have a challenge and response question. And I would say that you should have this anyway, because what happens if, like, my mom's 80 years old, doesn't understand technology? She gets calls all the time from automated phone, bots and different people where they'll say, they'll make a comment about your son's in jail. I need you to send money as fast as possible. I mean, there's so many different schemes out there and scams, I'm sorry. And so if you have a challenge and response, like what is your favorite food is the question. And then the answer, let's say it's Italian. If you both don't know those two components, I would hang up because of the automation. They can make it sounds legitimate. They can spoof phone numbers. So even like with me, when I get calls from my bank, I never call that number back. I go to the back of my credit card or my debit card and I call that number because I know for sure I'm calling the bank. And so it's those types of things I think we can do personally and professionally that will limit some of our risk, but it's not going to eliminate all of it. Did that answer your question?
Yes. I mean, to that regard, I mean, which has nothing to do with AI, but one of the things that I learned the hard way is that when you get an email, and especially in Gmail or any kind of Google product, you get an option to report spam and unsubscribe. Never ever unsubscribe, because what it does is it just sends an email back to the sender, essentially, giving an acknowledgement that they reached the right place, right? So, and that generates more, spam and other things. So always report spam and just keep it there. I mean, this is an advice that I got hard way because I was, somehow in an hour I got 1,200 spam emails, and it was being generated because I went in and I didn't subscribe to Apples on Wheels or whatever this is. So I would click on unsubscribe and it just perpetuated the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think you have. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, so I did have another question with respect to AI and cybersecurity and mitigation. I don't know if there are tools, but I've always thought about, when like the city of Columbus had recently, a big scandal. It's an ongoing thing where everybody who has ever walked into City Hall or interacted with City Hall in the last 5 years, all their data was, breached and put on the dark web, is what I hear.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that happens, are there any AI tools? I know there's a lot of noise in the data, but the noise can be our friend because it can unscramble and give fake information. So like on my name, what is the true social security number can go into the dark web and turn it into some random number, which, takes away the capability of, keeping the quality of that data any good for future things. And I was just wondering if AI can do that, or if there are AI tools of mitigation that can completely unscramble these breaches and with completely garbage data.
Yeah. So I think where it's kind of hard in the sense that because there's no absolutes in cybersecurity data, any of that stuff, I think what you're seeing, so interesting enough, a lot of security vendors all are saying out large language models, AI, deepfake. And I have a couple of large clients that said, we're not going to be able to use these tools if they have AI embedded in them. Well, the problem is all of them are using it. So then what do you do when you make a statement that says we can't use a tool that has AI or large language models? And so that's all started to change. I think where it's going to be a little more challenging to have like kind of that perfect storm of a good solution for that is that one, there really will need to be a trusted source. But when that goes out, for every one trusted source, there could be a dozen or more of things that say they do the same thing, but they're actually on the back end, they're harvesting data. And like when you were talking about the Gmail thing, if I unsubscribe, I will only unsubscribe going to, like if it's an app or email, going to their website and do it. And if they're doing that, that's not good that they're doing. I can't tell you that all of them will do it correctly, but I think any reputable company, because there are laws around spamming, and you can actually have your ISP shut down. I mean, they can stop you from doing business on the internet if you're spamming so much. So those laws came out, I don't remember, but a while ago. I think it's just all of this is, to me, is about being with due diligence. You have to like kind of keep an eye on things. Like, I don't normally take those free credit monitoring, and I won't pay for it. But like every time I log in to pay my bills, I look at my checking account. I have alerting coming to my phone when, if there's a transaction over a certain dollar amount. So those are the types of things that I think you can kind of take control of and just kind of monitor those things. I know it can be challenging, but with the apps, a lot of them on our phone, there, we can definitely kind of keep track of things pretty easily. I'm sure over time there will be like some more tools, and there may be some, I'm just not aware of them. But I think it's going to be pretty challenging because it evolves and changes so quickly. It's kind of like when we write code for an application, it's not like you write code one time and you never write anything else. So it's kind of this evolving thing at all times, unfortunately. Any other questions? Quiet group. So
Billy, Shivansh, Dinda?
are all of you, like, you can do a thumbs up, and the ones I can see on camera, are all of you using any of the generative AI tools today?
Yep.
So I also use it just on my phone. So I don't use it on my work computer. But I think that I would encourage you to use it, but just use it in a safe way. So, like, for example, if you're like, say you have to do a presentation to your leadership team, you can say, please provide me with 5 topics that executive leadership would be interested around cybersecurity, AI, app development, whatever that is. It'll come back, and I think it can help you organize your thoughts very, very well. So again, for me, I use it more as a high level, and then I dig in deeper based on my experience and my knowledge. But I don't know about you guys, but I go with 50 million miles a minute. Sometimes my brain is constantly going, and I have sometimes a hard time like being able to take all my thoughts and put it into Word document or writing it down. So sometimes I use it to organize my thoughts, and then once I do that, it's the rest of it's so much easier for me. I mean, everybody does things, differently, but I just think it's really a good idea just to use it for leverage. And I know, Vinny, you're at Tech Elevator, but like I would encourage your students to use it for like when they're applying for jobs. What are typical questions that would be asked when I'm interviewing for this role? It's not to say that they will be asked, but more likely it's going to give them at least a handful of things they could potentially better prepare for. So I think it's those types of things. So interesting enough, you may have heard this, but what we're starting to see is people are using, generative AI to write resumes. So what you do is you upload a job description, and then it writes a resume. And then what it does is it basically blacks out, so it's white on a piece of paper, all of the buzzwords from the job description, but to the naked eye, you don't see it. So what's happened with some of the people I know that have had some interviews with people is that they interview this person and they're like, where is this person in front of me based on their resume? Because as we know, a lot of companies use some type of application to run, people's resumes through to see like what buzzwords. So like if it's asking for certifications or it's asking for some specific things. The other thing with the deep fake stuff, a couple months ago, there was a Zoom call, and there was the CFO, I believe, and then a couple of the C-suite, so like the CEO, and only the CFO was real. Everybody else was fake. And everything was lined up, sounded right, and the CFO actually wrote a check, I believe, for $24 million. So when we think about even like these calls, have we all been on these calls where we all work from home these days? So if your internet's not stable all the time, have you ever seen like someone's talking and their mouth isn't matching the words because the screen's frozen up? So it's getting really challenging because you can't say if that happens that 100% that is real or fake. And so that's where some of this deep fake stuff gets really, really crazy because they can emulate people, the way people look. They can emulate the way, even just they track like, people that are out speaking all the time. They can track like facial expressions. They can track like body movements. And so some of these, when I watch them, I'm like, oh my God, this looks so legitimate. And so it's really challenging to find that. And so the thing that I also would think about is, I think most of us can agree, like when you talk to someone on a regular basis, you kind of know their tone, you kind of know what they would say, what they didn't say. So, for example, in security awareness, back in the day, the phishing emails would have improper grammar, misspellings. So it was a little easier to detect. Now people are using AI to write them. So even if it's coming from people that English is not their first language in the United States, it's actually perfect. So now we're saying on the opposite side, if it's like totally perfect and people don't write like that, that could be an indication that it's not real. So again, I don't want you to be overly paranoid, but I always tell people to trust your gut, because every time that I have fallen for something like this, as soon as I did it, I was like, crap, why did I just do that? And so it's just trying to like make sure you're paying attention. The other big thing we're starting to see is the English A and the Russian A are very, very similar, but they're different. So what they'll do is, let's say US bank, um, it will be US bank all in English except for that A that's in the Russian A. And how many people really pay that much attention to that? So I also think you should just kind of pay attention to URLs on the top, and emails. You can right click them and it'll show the whole extension of that. And many times in the scams, if you like look further into the email address, there's something weird to it. And again, there's so much stuff that you get, it's so hard sometimes to tell what's real and what's not real, and they're making it tougher and tougher. I think we're going to start to see a lot more around identity access management, where we're going to have to be able to validate who we are from a deeper perspective than what we currently are doing now. So yeah, it's definitely that. I mean, that's one of the reasons I love being in cyber, because I get bored easily, and I've never been bored once in 18 years because it's constantly evolving and changing, and I'm like a sponge. I love to learn. And so for me, it's very exciting. So if any of you are ever consider going into cybersecurity, there's a ton of domains. Happy to talk to you, connect with you. I think it's one of the funnest careers that I've ever had in my life, and I've done quite a few different ones. So sorry, I don't have the silver bullet answer. It's honestly, a lot of it is about being diligent of what you're doing.
Hey, Vinny, should we answer that question? You want to read it up?
Yes.
So, Benny, how are you using ChatGPT at work?
So yeah,
Or
we have a hiring platform called Hiration here that
okay,
we offer for our students. So it's powered by ChatGPT. So a student will be able to put in their resume, and it will give them keyword search recommendations on it, as well as like how to optimize their resume. It also has a feature on there that you can record. We've programmed a bunch of interviews in there for them to practice. It will take a video of you and record it, and then the AI will read back to you notes and of like your eye contact was poor, your posture's poor, like there's if it's a technical question that has like true or false elements to it, it's like there's nothing that was correct about your answer, or this part is great, but you need to focus more on this, this, and this. And it's been a really great booster for students for a couple of reasons. One is obviously they get that practice and so by the time they go to a real interview, they have some practical advice that they can go off. But a lot of companies are adopting these kind of the pre-recorded interviews and take place of the phone screen, and it's very important that students have that part of it. The second way we've been using AI or ChatGPT or Copilot here is that staff have access to like a protected version of Copilot, like our own instance, so to speak,
Yeah.
which the Copilot, Gemini, and ChatGPT all offer part of their enterprise portfolio of like a containerized version of this, so that it's just yours and the data doesn't leave that, and you just have to update it like once every 6 months. We have that. We also have it embedded into our curriculum now, so that when students get towards the end of our program, they learn how to use Copilot in a way that helps them boost how they write code. We don't teach it to them at the beginning because it's very important for them to understand the principles around software development. And when they go to code, they need to be able to recognize if it's good code or bad code, because ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini are only as good at writing code as the people who program them. And when you're creating something novel or something new, it might not know all the moves you want to make or not make the correct moves that you want to see out of a developer to do. So it's important that they know the principles, but we teach it later on. So, and then us staff get to use Copilot over here from our containerized version of it to help with whatever it is we need to use it for.
And I think the most important thing is when you talk about those functions is making sure, especially if you're putting real lines of code, you don't want to put that in something everybody could see. So it needs to be containerized and locked down to only your four walls. So interesting enough with the interviews, what we're also starting to see is ChatGPT is so fast. They all are. So when people are doing phone screens, what they're doing is their phone is sitting right in front of them. They may have the microphone on, or they'll repeat the question so it gets put into ChatGPT and it gives them the answer. Well, it may not always be the right answer, but the right answer. And so I think what we have to face is, for me, when I think about education as a whole, I think we need to get away from people memorizing stuff and allowing them to use tools and resources the way we do in our jobs. So, for example, ChatGPT may be one of your resources, but then could you go back to your team and have an open discussion about this is what, ChatGPT brought back some really, really good suggestions, but will this work in our organization? Because just because ChatGPT says it doesn't mean it may work in all organizations, because you talk about culture and how teams are put together. There's just so many dimensions that really certainly change around that. So I think I love that you guys are doing that, and that again, teaching them responsible ways of using it, for just using it versus as a shortcut or a way to cheat the system, because eventually if you're doing that, they're going to find out. So I think it's kind of like, for us before, I took computer classes in high school, but it was mostly DOS and like it's completely changed. But I think about, back then, learning that skill set, to me, it's like a library, but you don't have to physically go to a library. So a library is a resource center. So is ChatGPT. So is, any of the open AI stuff is to me as an additional resource to put in your toolbox or tool belt, whatever you decide you want to have. So yeah, so no, that's great. I like that you're using it that way. Any other questions?
I think it's all. I just love to hear your take on this. I think it's also important for folks when they're using these tools to consider the heat of what they're putting out there. So like I don't know if you can do this or not, but you can adjust the heat on ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot in the settings, and the heat just means the higher the heat, the more likely it is that it's going to feel the pressure to give you an answer. So it's going to dig through the language learning model that it's already in and give you an answer of whatever it is. So if you're based on where you are and what you're doing with it, you can change the scope of the heat just depending on how accurate you need to be. I think that's just super interesting to watch on how different people use the tool. I'd love to hear your take on it and what any advice you have for anybody out there.
Yeah, and I was kind of saying this a little bit earlier, like the more specific you can be with ChatGPT when you ask, or any of them like that, the more specific you are in the questions, the better responses that you get. So what that's doing is looking, on the back end, they're looking at keywords, key phrases to pull the data from what you do. And I play around with it a lot where I'll ask it a generic question and I get a lot of nothing, to be honest with you. And then when I'm more specific, like, so for example, I've been doing some security awareness around AI deepfake for executives. And so I basically went into ChatGPT and said, what core topics should you cover with your C-suite around AI deepfake and security? Versus just saying what core topics do you talk about AI with security. I put in some keywords that helped to capture the audience of who I'm speaking with. And I will say in my mind, I had some of the thoughts. It just reconfirmed my thought process was probably on and going in the right way. So that's where really on that back end, it's those keywords. It's just like when you think about when you do searches on Google or any other of the platforms, if you keep it generic, you'll probably get, tens of thousands of links that you could look at. Where if you're more specific, there may still be a lot, but then it prioritizes, on top probably what aligns more specifically with what you asked it. So, some of the large language models and the AI kind of work the same way. I mean, there's more on the back end that I'm not aware of, but yeah, definitely you can use it to your advantage if you learn how to ask the questions. We're actually starting to build curriculum around some of the training we do with corporations. So something that could have taken 40 hours to develop might take 2 days now or less. But it's like, again, putting in the model so specific, and it can build out graphs. It can build out all kinds of things if you use it right. And most of those are paid versions of it. Or, and it's our own instance versus just using the open source one that everybody has access to. So I think that the more you train it to think kind of the way you're thinking, then you'll start to see the responses be more aligned with what you're trying to learn or understand or, expand on. It's not perfect like anything else, but I think you can learn to play with the models a little bit by the way you ask.
There was a question out here from Shivansh. You didn't ask the question, Shivansh?
So Sarvansh asked, what are your thoughts on quantum computers and it having the potential to break the current encryption systems and the role it could play in the future of cybersecurity and AI?
Yeah, so that's an interesting conversation. So I remember when I started 18 years ago, encryption that was put in place back then, they said it would be hundreds of years before it was cracked. And if you think about it, I mean, there are some people that live to 100, but if it's 200, none of us will be around in 200 years. I mean, our kids or our family and all your friends, that stuff, as they're younger. But that's where the evolution of encryption has kind of changed in the way that we can't get so comfortable that what's working today will work tomorrow. So I feel like in the cybersecurity space, they're always looking to expand that. And so you're starting to see, some additional things like biometrics. And when I talked earlier about identity access and management, I'm sure you guys have heard the word zero trust, which to me, everyone has different opinions on it and what it means, how it works. But we're kind of getting to the point with being able to take data and making sure that we trust the sender because it's so hard to tell what's right and what's not right. And so there has been evolution. And I will say encryption is probably one of the hardest things in cybersecurity. It's very mathematical and scientific. That is not me by any means. I mean, I can do basic math, but when you get into some of this, very few people know how to do it. And so there's this constant evolution of how do we improve it? How do we add complexity to it? And so I know there's not like a specific answer, but quantum computing and a lot of these other things are creating like the perfect storm beyond AI, beyond large LLMs, around quantum, all of that. Things are just evolving and changing. So every time this new technology comes out, from a security perspective, we're having to figure out how can we protect it more. And so I don't have specific answers on that, but it's a work in progress. And as I mentioned, it's a journey, not a destination. And so when I think about when I started 18 years ago, maybe there are 4 to 6 breaches a year. We have 4 to 6 breaches a day now. So it is, in 18 years, it's evolved from 4 to 6 a year. And sometimes we didn't even have like 1 or 2. And now it's like, I feel like every time you turn your TV on, there's some new breach. So it's just something we continue to look at and review and try to figure out the best way to make people and our organizations safer.
Any other questions?
Going once, going twice. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Connie.
Yeah.
Folks, this will be posted on YouTube later this week. We look forward to interacting with you more in the future, and we'll see you in 3 weeks for our next Lunch and Learn. Connie, again, thank you so much for speaking with us here today. It's been a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I like the interactive stuff, so thanks for asking questions. That I hate when I'm just speaking for an hour and no one's engaging. I'm like, talk to us, come on. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course.